On July 17, 1955, in the city of Anaheim, California, a magical, fantastical theme park known as Disneyland would have its official opening day. The opening day festivities would also be televised, with reports ranging from an estimated and unprecedented 70 to 90 million viewers watching as Mr. Walter Elias Disney brought his dreams to fruition. From opening day to the present, Disneyland has strived to bring families and the many tourists who visit each year a fun, magical experience, and through its iconic classic attractions to new, innovative technology, one can say that Disney's just getting warmed up. But how did Mr. Disney imagine such a place? And what would it take for him to get it up and running? For those answers and more, we'll take a trip back in time and explore the foundations of a dream turned reality and how Walt Disney built his theme park kingdom known as Disneyland. It's all here on this episode of Bry Adventures, the History of Disneyland. I'm Brian Armand, and like you, I enjoy a good adventure. Fun, fantastic, and magical journeys await. So sit back as I take a new excursion forward on this episode of Bry Adventures. Disneyland has a very in-depth history. As a park which would find itself over the years consistently adding new rides, attractions, shows, and the like, the amount of details that reside in its history are plentiful. As we move forward into this history of Disneyland, we'll take a look at some of its historic highlights throughout the years and focus on some of its iconic attractions and lands that the park debuted back in 1955. We'll also briefly touch upon additional attractions that made their way into Disneyland several years after the park opened. However, before venturing into that, we'll take a look at the man who once had a vision for this most magical place on Earth and the happiest place on Earth. The man whose name is, in fact, Disney, Walt Disney. Who was Walter Elias Disney? For that, we take a brief look into Walt's early life, including his interests that eventually led him to building his first major theme park. On December 5, 1901, Walter Elias Disney was born in Chicago, Illinois. Several years later, in 1906, his family moved to farmland in Marceline, Missouri. It was there that Walt became interested in drawing, and his fascination for trains also started around this time. Years later, when the Disney family moved to Kansas City, Missouri, Walt became friends with a classmate who introduced him to the world of movies, and Walt's interest started to grow. Walt and his family moved back to Chicago for a brief time where Walt became a cartoonist for his high school newspaper. In 1919, Walt moved back to Kansas City, and it was there that he met with Ub Iwerks. Both Iwerks and Disney were artists for a commercial art studio. Disney and Iwerks decided to venture into animation together, and Iwerks would become Disney's head animator. The first couple of years of the 1920s saw Walt's first professional animation studio. Laugh-O-Gram Film Studios was born on the second floor of the McConaughey Building in Kansas City, Missouri. Walt's interest in fairy tales really started to take off during the short time he was at Laugh-O-Gram. And with that, Disney, along with Iwerks and several other animators, Laugh-O-Gram started producing animation films. It's said that Walt's earliest inspiration for Mickey Mouse came from a timid, stray mouse he would see around the desk while he was at Laugh-O-Gram. In 1923, Laugh-O-Gram filed for bankruptcy, and Walt, falling on hard times, decided to make the move to Hollywood. He would arrive in LA in August of that same year, 1923. His brother Roy had been in LA for treatment of an illness, and Walt's uncle had also resided there as well. It would be here in Los Angeles where Walt and Roy would together start Disney Brothers Studios. Initially, Walt and Roy started in this shed garage on the side of his Uncle Robert's house. Walt and Roy set up shop and went to work on ideas right away. However, that wouldn't last long, and in October of 1923, Walt found a small office space for rent that he and his brother could work out of. It was only a couple of blocks down the road on Kingswell Avenue from where he was staying at his uncle's house. The new location, Disney Brothers Studios, would be where they worked on films, and in 1924, Disney contacted iWorks to come out to Hollywood. On July 13, 1925, Walt Disney married Lillian Bounds. She was working as a secretary for Disney Brothers Studios at the time. In 1926, Walt Disney's first studio in Hollywood was established. It was a full-on studio and much bigger than the Kingswell Avenue location, located on Hyperion Avenue. On a side note, this would be around the time to where Mickey Mouse, as we know him, was born. In 1927, Disney and iWorks created a character known as Oswald the Lucky Rabbit for Universal Pictures. They wanted a rabbit type of cartoon character, as cats were used quite commonly around that time. The character Oswald was featured in Universal's short Trolley Troubles. Oswald became a major hit for Universal and went up against other shorts such as Felix the Cat. Later on, Walt would discover that Universal owned the intellectual property rights to the character Oswald. This prompted Disney and iWorks to create a character of their own, Mickey Mouse. Originally named Mortimer Mouse, it was Disney's wife Lillian who thought the name Mickey to be more appropriate. Mickey's first appearance would be in the 1928 animation release Steamboat Willie, along with Minnie Mouse. Although several months earlier, both Mickey and Minnie were featured in a test screening animation short entitled Plain Crazy. Disney had sketched Mickey, and iWorks would then revise the character for animation. Fun fact, Walt Disney would go on to provide Mickey's voice until 1947.
Yeah, it's me, I guess.
Walt wanted to do something different. He wanted to stand out amongst the rest. While cartoon shorts of the time were silent, Walt conjured up the idea to create a full feature-length animated production with sound. Walt was an innovator. He thrived at utilizing advanced technology, and it was his goal to make it all happen, to which it did. In 1934, Disney went from producing animated shorts to the more profitable full-length animation features. Walt and his Disney company began work on the fairy tale Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. It became the first animated feature in full color and sound, topping off at $1.5 million, which was way off its initial budget. They made use of the multiplane camera, which allowed for a great three-dimensional effect.
So we have hurriedly thrown together a little film that we hope will give you some idea of the methods involved and the great amount of work involved in the production of these pictures.
This is the fundamental principle behind the making of animated motion pictures at the Walt Disney Studios today. First step in the complex process is to create an interesting story. Sketchmen are then called in to make rough drawings. These drawings, after much trial and error, are tacked up on storyboards in sequence. The story then moves into a conference room, where Walt Disney comes in to look it over. For Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Walt is spending most of his time in spirited meetings.
Snow White debuted in 1937 and by 1938 became the most successful motion picture of its time.
The picture that every newspaper and magazine critic is raving about. Snow White is as exciting as a Western, as funny as a haywire comedy. It combines the classic idiom of folklore drama with rollicking comic strip humor. It is an authentic masterpiece.
Walt and his team would soon outgrow the Hyperion Avenue studio location, and construction on a more elaborate studio over in Burbank was in the works. In January of 1940, construction at the studio's new location was complete, and Walt and his team made the move over to his new Burbank location. They were moved in and ready to go by May of that very same year, in 1940. It's said that even some of the structures from the Hyperion Avenue location made their way onto the new studio lot in Burbank. On a side note, in 1966, what was left of Walt's old Hyperion Avenue studio was demolished, and a new supermarket was built in its place on this historic site. Now, with a more robust studio space in place, Walt and his team moved onward. Walt and his Disney animation team would continue to produce other famous animated films such as Pinocchio and Fantasia, just to name some. 1950 became the year that Cinderella would be released. It would be Disney's first animated feature in 8 years. At the time, Disney was also working on his first live-action feature entitled Treasure Island. Other animated features would follow, with Alice in Wonderland in 1951 and Peter Pan in 1953. As the 1950s moved along, Walt set his interests on other ventures, and although he was still in the loop with everything, his involvement in animation was less, and he left most of that work to his team of talented animators. This time away gave Walt some great ideas as well. Walt also began his own distribution, Buena Vista. Walt had an idea in his mind for quite a while about a place where families could go and spend time in a safe, clean, friendly environment where people of all ages could be transported into a magical world that featured both educational and amusement values. Walt had this idea while watching his daughters have a fun time on the carousel in Griffith Park in LA.
As I'd sit there while they rode the merry-go-round, did all these things, sit on a bench, eating peanuts, I felt that there should be something built, some kind of an amusement enterprise built where that the parents and the children could have fun together. So that's how Disneyland started. Well, it took many years. It was a whole period of maybe 15 years developing. I started with many ideas, threw them away, started all over again. And eventually it evolved into what you see today as Disneyland. But it all started from a daddy with two daughters wondering where he could take them, where he could have a little fun with them too.
This wasn't just an idea Walt had. However, it was a grand vision of many things he had either seen or experienced in his life leading up to this point. Walt Studios in Burbank was a place that had many people interested in visiting. However, in Walt's mind, he felt that the movie studios alone would not provide any significant entertainment value. So he imagined a small park referred to as the Mickey Mouse Park that would have a couple of small themed areas including a boat ride. He envisioned this concept on a small piece of land that sat opposite of his studios in Burbank, and in 1952, he was granted zoning permissions to build. Over the years, Walt had traveled to many other themed attractions, and he was heavily inspired on what he saw and experienced. Walt formed WED Enterprises, which eventually became Walt Disney Imagineering, and he put his Imagineers to work right away. As his designers worked on research for the new park, they eventually realized that their concept needed a much bigger parcel of land, and the land across from Walt's Burbank studios would be too small to implement a lot of their ideas. Walt set out to find a bigger piece of land and eventually purchased 160 acres in Anaheim, a city in Orange County, California, about 35 miles away from his Burbank studios. Funding for the larger park became an issue, and Mr. Disney decided to shop around an idea to fund the project by producing a reoccurring program entitled Disneyland, eventually known as The Wonderful World of Disney. The TV program would highlight and preview the new up-and-coming park and what it had to offer, including some of its various lands. The network, ABC, picked it up, and Disney and ABC became involved in the project. This was the beginning of Disney's relationship with the ABC network. With funding in place, construction on Disneyland began on July 16, 1954. All the concepts and designs were now all coming to fruition, and Mr. Walt Disney would watch his land come to life.
Now on a site of 240 acres near the city of Anaheim in Southern California, right about in here, we've begun to build Disneyland the place. We hope that it will be unlike anything else on this earth. Fair, amusement park, an exhibition, a city from the Arabian Nights, metropolis from the future. In fact, a place of hopes and dreams, facts and fancy, all in one. Now, next year, our television show will be coming from this Disneyland. But this year, we want you to see and share with us the experience of building this dream into a reality.
On Sunday, July 17, 1955, just 1 year and 1 day later from the initial start of construction, Disneyland had its grand opening. The cost of the project, $17 million. All of Mr. Disney's designers' hard work and dedication would now hopefully pay off, and that one vision he had of his own daughters having fun on a carousel in Griffith Park would now be put to the test, and the day for it was finally here. For families of all ages from all over could now come and make their own fun memories.
And now, Walt Disney will step forward to read the dedication of Disneyland.
To all who come to this happy place, welcome. Disneyland is dedicated to the ideals, the dreams, and the hard facts that have created America. with the hope that it will be a source of joy and inspiration to all the world. Thank you.
This afternoon, Disneyland, the world's most fabulous kingdom, will be unveiled before an invitational world premiere, and you are guests. Art Linkletter will be your host, and with ABC crews and cameras on the spot, will guide you through this truly magic land. And to start the proceedings, we take you to the entrance of Disneyland and your host, Art Linkletter.
That's not Art Linkletter. That's Mickey Mouse, the inimitable little character that started this whole story with Walt Disney 25 years ago. Perhaps the most popular motion picture star in Hollywood.
Opening day was to be reserved for the media and invited guests only. However, the next day Disney opened to the public. Opening day saw around 28,000 people, although only 11,000 were expected. The park opened with over 30 attractions and 5 themed areas: Main Street USA, Adventureland, Frontierland, Fantasyland, and Tomorrowland. Main Street USA was at the entrance of Disneyland, set as an early 20th century Midwest town. A lot of inspiration for the look of it came from Walt's hometown of Marceline, Missouri. Here, one would find a train station, firehouse, town square, movie theater, city hall, and various shops and other small town atmosphere, all with a touch of Disney magic. Main Street USA's train station housed a train that would encircle the park. Walt's great love of trains since he was young played an important role at the park. In fact, Walt himself had a rideable miniature backyard train in his Holmby Hills estate known as the Carrollwood Pacific Railroad. He named his real steam locomotive the Lily Bell, after his wife Lillian.
I decided my locomotive would be modeled after a Central Pacific locomotive that was built in Sacramento in the year 1872.
This would also inspire him to create a full-size version within Disneyland. The train was also an opening day attraction. However, throughout the years, several changes, implementations, and such have been added to complement its route throughout the park. At the end of Main Street is the iconic Sleeping Beauty's castle, which stands 77 feet tall. Walt's idea for using a technique called forced perspective allows for the castle to appear much taller. This technique was also used throughout the Main Street USA area, particularly on the upper floors of the shops that line the streets. This technique gives the illusion of something being much taller or bigger than it really is, from the perspective of the individual who's viewing it. Making our way to the next themed area, we find ourselves in Adventureland. Adventureland recreates an exotic tropical atmosphere.
Let's join the crowd and share with them in the fun of a true-life adventure in Adventureland as it is today. As we enter the gates of this tropical settlement, we leave the everyday world far behind. For here, the atmosphere is filled with the sights and sounds typical of an isolated trading post on some hidden jungle waterway.
Walt envisioned a lush jungle-like setting far away from civilization, where animals roam, and one of the original opening day star attractions was the Jungle Cruise. The Jungle Cruise takes park guests on a replica-styled steam riverboat adventure, traversing through various waterways throughout a rainforest, jungle-like setting as guests listen to the boat skipper's narration while they look at various scenes filled with animatronics along the way.
Welcome aboard the Zambezi Mist. Now, we leave the international dock, the last outpost of civilization, and glide into the upper reaches of the Amazon. Immediately ahead of the boat, on the right-hand side, watch, we're approaching them now, those 3 charging alligators. Now watch your hands, please, watch the hand. Oh. Last week, 2 of them broke their leashes, gouged a terrific hole in the side of one boat. Of course, to stock Adventureland with live animals was neither safe nor practical. So on paper, we began to sketch and design replicas that would be made of plastic and steel, but when in action would be as lifelike as their real counterparts.
The electrical wizards get their biggest shock when they find that everything works.
There are various animatronics representing specific animals known to live within the recreated settings. Imagineer Bill Evans, who was responsible for Disneyland's landscaping, went to work on landscape design for this attraction. Walt wanted this attraction to be as lifelike as possible, right down to having real live animals. Eventually realizing that live animals within the attraction would not be feasible, Walt still wanted a lifelike feel to the ride, and the landscaping, among other things along the ride's pathway, definitely delivered upon Walt's vision. The comedic narration that would become famous at the Jungle Cruise wasn't always that way. As Walt's vision was a realistic adventure, the narration spiel was more like narration found within a nature documentary. Like with many rides and attractions at Disneyland, the Jungle Cruise also went through many various changes and upgrades throughout the years. Not all Disneyland's now classic attractions opened with the park back on opening day in 1955, and this was also the case in various other areas and lands within the park. Other themed attractions that followed years later were Swiss Family Treehouse and the Enchanted Tiki Room. The Enchanted Tiki Room, which opened on June 23, 1963, was somewhat of a technology marvel, and in fact was Walt's first attraction to employ audio animatronics. These animatronics were computer-controlled and they synced sound to the robotic movements. Together, you get a more realistic, lifelike animatronic, and in the case of the Tiki Room, they were these exotic, lifelike birds.
You know, the same scientific equipment that guides rockets to the moon is used to make Jose and his little friends in the Tiki Room sing, talk, move, and practically think for themselves. I guess you could call him a creature of the space age.
Steeped in Tiki culture, this Polynesian-themed attraction, or room as it's called, treats guests to a unique Polynesian experience. Originally, the idea for the Tiki Room was for it to be a restaurant where guests would be serenaded by the tropical audio animatronic birds above. A fun fact about the interior of the Tiki Room: at the center of the room resides the Magic Fountain. It was originally planned to be a coffee station for the original proposed idea for a restaurant. 4 lifelike animatronic birds host the show. They are parrot-like birds, each with their own specific name. The show has signature songs by Walt's music team, the Sherman Brothers, and its unique presentation along the way give guests a lifelike Polynesian experience. Heading over to Frontierland, Walt's vision here was to recreate the pioneer days of the American frontier. Walt wanted his guests to experience what it was like to live within the country's early days, documenting its history, and that allowed for some great attractions for guests to enjoy. One attraction was the Mark Twain Riverboat, which resided on the Rivers of America, one of Walt's man-made rivers. Both the Rivers of America and the Mark Twain Riverboat were opening day attractions. Sailing ship Columbia was another attraction to join the Mark Twain on the Rivers of America several years later. The Golden Horseshoe Saloon was also opened with the park on July 17, 1955. However, it had also unofficially opened for Walt and his wife Lillian 4 days earlier on July 13th to celebrate their 30th wedding anniversary.
Your attention, please. Will Walt Disney's special guests please go to the Golden Horseshoe in Frontierland?
The Golden Horseshoe Review here in Frontierland in Disneyland.
Corporate sponsors also got to experience the saloon prior to opening day on July 16, 1955. Over the years, the saloon played host to various stage shows. 1 year after Disneyland's opening in 1956, Tom Sawyer Island opened. It was an artificial island surrounded by the Rivers of America. Opening on July 2, 1956, was Rainbow Caverns Mine Train. On June 12, 1960, the Mine Train Through Nature's Wonderland opened. It was an extension to the already existing Mine Train attraction from 1956. It featured audio animatronic animals in both desert and wooded themed areas. Mine Train Through Nature's Wonderland closed on January 2, 1977, as construction for a new ride, Big Thunder Mountain, was ready to get underway.
Force has unleashed the runaway mine trains on Big Thunder Mountain, but every day, Big Thunder strikes. Big Thunder strikes. It could only happen at Disneyland.
Big Thunder Mountain would open at the park in 1979. It was in part inspired by Bryce Canyon National Park in southwestern Utah. Splash Mountain, which opened on July 17, 1989, was located in the area of the park named Critter Country. Critter Country was originally named Bear Country when the area first opened back on March 4, 1972, and its main attraction was the Country Bear Jamboree. Walt Disney World in Florida debuted the Country Bears attraction in 1971, and its wide popularity allowed for Disneyland's version to be built. Thus, the name Bear Country was implemented to accommodate the new show. Bear Country was later renamed Critter Country in 1988 to prepare for the opening of Splash Mountain. In 2023, Splash Mountain closed in both Walt Disney World and Disneyland to make way for a new adventure, Tiana's Bayou Adventure, which was themed to the 2009 animated film, The Princess and the Frog. Fantasyland was one of Walt's most fantastical areas of the park. Guests could fly with Peter Pan on Peter Pan's Flight, a suspended rail dark ride which took guests on a magical adventure, or have a go-around on King Arthur's Carousel. The carousel, built in 1922, was brought to Disneyland from Sunnyside Beach Park in Canada, refurbished, and was one of Fantasyland's opening day attractions. Another attraction to open with the park was the widely popular Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. Fantasyland's theming was of a Renaissance fair when it first debuted in 1955. It had stayed so for several decades until 1983, when a reimagination of the land was put forth. The reason for these changes within Fantasyland came from the tight quarters of its original design. Rides were too close to one another, leaving walkways congested at times, and the 1983 redesign of the land addressed those issues along with new attractions as well. The Renaissance theming would also receive a makeover to a Bavarian-themed village. On June 14, 1958, a new attraction, Alice in Wonderland, had debuted in Fantasyland. The ride was based on the 1951 Disney animated film, which carried the same name. Tomorrowland would round out the 5 original lands opening with the park back on July 17, 1955. This land would focus on the future, and its original theme was heavily influenced on the space age. The design of this area of the park saw technical consulting from real rocket scientists for a more realistic approach to what guests would experience. Opening day attractions here included Rocket to the Moon, Astrojets, and Utopia. This was Disneyland in 1955, and Disney itself would continue to build upon its opening day attractions over the years, along with various live entertainment, parades, shows, food, concessions, restaurants, and shops for any Disney souvenir imaginable. Disneyland was continuing to move forward. After Disneyland's debut opening in 1955, some more iconic attractions had started to make their way into the park within the next several years. The Disneyland Skyway was one such attraction. Opening on June 23, 1956, this ride was a great way to see the park from above. It provided guests with an aerial journey over the park. As it was coined, passengers could take the Skyway to Fantasyland and the Skyway to Tomorrowland. It was built by Switzerland manufacturer Von Roll, a company who specialized in gondola lifts and aerial tramways. The Skyway would eventually close on November 9, 1994. The Tomorrowland station would be demolished. However, the Fantasyland station remained unused till 2016. When clearing for the new Star Wars themed area was underway. Prior to the Skyway closing down in 1994, in 1959 it would find its way traversing through another new attraction, the Matterhorn bobsleds, which debuted at the park on June 14, 1959. Since the Skyway was already up and running from its debut in 1956, the idea was to have the Skyway continue its journey through the Matterhorn mountain. With the Skyway traveling through the mountain, it made for a scenic part of the ride. The Matterhorn was an idea Walt had when he saw the real Matterhorn mountain in Switzerland, while filming the production Third Man on the Mountain. The Matterhorn attraction at Disneyland also helped conceal one of the Skyway's tall support columns. The attraction itself consists of a pair of intertwined coasters that traverse through and around the Matterhorn mountain. It was noted as the first tubular steel coaster in the world, and the ride experience gives guests the feeling of what it would feel like riding a bobsled. When the Skyway closed down in 1994, the areas where the Skyway went through the mountain were partially covered up. A fun fact, the area where the Matterhorn resides is on the borders of both Fantasyland and Tomorrowland. This same area, when the park opened in 1955, was a big hill filled by dirt taken from the Sleeping Beauty's castle moat when it was being constructed. The hill then was transformed into the Matterhorn bobsleds attraction. June 14, 1959 was a most notable day in Disneyland, as several new major rides were to debut that day within Tomorrowland. The Matterhorn, which we just covered, was one of them, which on a side note later became part of Fantasyland. Other attractions that opened on that same day were the Submarine Voyage and the Disneyland Monorail. The Utopia Highway track was also updated, including a new redesign to its fleet of cars, which also had been retooled on several occasions throughout the years. The Disneyland Monorail, another debut on June 14, 1959, was probably one of Disney's most iconic attractions that serves as both a ride and also provides transportation around Disneyland. However, if we backtrack only several years earlier, prior to the monorail being installed at the park, Walt's love of the futuristic travel of tomorrow, coupled with his love of trains, gave him an idea for an attraction which would combine both. Walt wanted something sooner than later. In a train attraction, although he already had the Disneyland Railroad, which debuted on opening day in 1955, Walt's vision of a futuristic train built on a traditional train track just might fit the bill. In a parcel of land that was once home to the Mickey Mouse Club Circus, which opened back in November of 1955, Walt was now putting into action his plan for the new attraction, which was called the Viewliner Train of Tomorrow. This upcoming train attraction was to be based on GM's new Aero train, which had launched in 1955, yet Walt's version that he had in mind would be on a miniature scale of the original. The Aero train to Walt was an innovative idea to bring transportation into the future, and Walt was all about future innovation, as could be seen by the many ideas and concepts for attractions that made their way into the parks, especially Tomorrowland. Imagineer Bob Gurr, one of Walt's finest designers of Disney vehicles, was put to the task to design the train that would become the Viewliner. Bob was instrumental in designing many ride vehicles for various attractions at Disneyland, including the future monorail system, along with his design team.
This is the Disneyland Viewliner, the fastest miniature train in the world, and one of the newest additions to the Magic Kingdom.
The Viewliner would open in Tomorrowland on June 10, 1957. However, it was short-lived and closed on September 30, 1958, to make way for the monorail. The Viewliner was said to be only a temporary attraction, while plans for something much bigger were in the works. You can make the assumption that the Viewliner was sort of an early vision of the monorail, where it took guests around the park much like the monorail would eventually do, with the difference being the Viewliner was a completely different ride system based on train tracks, while the monorail, a much more sophisticated ride system, rode atop a one-rail beam just above 40 feet high off the ground.
Let's take a look ahead and see what the commuter can hope for in the future. Traffic engineers agree that a monorail system could well be an answer to growing traffic congestion. In large cities where land is at a premium, an aerial monorail system needs only a narrow beamway supported by pylons. The accent is on economy.
When the monorail first opened, it was called the Disneyland Alweg Monorail System and was only a ride attraction that took riders around Disneyland. It had only one station at the time that it would travel to and from in a loop. That would all change in 1961 when the monorail served another purpose, transportation to and from the Disneyland Hotel, where another station was added. The original station was retrofitted to accommodate this new expansion and the addition of several monorails which consisted of 4 cars each. As the years went on, Disneyland began to expand with new lands, attractions, and the like, and the monorail system would also expand. The monorail and some of its stations were significantly reimagined, updated, more cars added to each train, and more trains added to the platform throughout the many expansions Disneyland went through. It originally opened with its Mark I trains, and throughout the years added several revisions to its system. The Submarine Voyage was another June 14, 1959 addition to the Tomorrowland expansion.
Now it's time for some brand new adventures in Disneyland. And the first of these will be the launching of Walt Disney's new submarine fleet, which incidentally is the 8th largest subfleet in the world. But there's a story behind that, as there is with most of the things that Walt does.
This was a submarine ride that traversed around the attraction on a guided rail. As guests enter the sub, the atmosphere within allows guests to feel as if they are ready to submerge deep underwater, with narration that's heard from the captain, advising its crew to secure and ready to embark on its adventure undersea. The effect of submerging deep into the ocean is created by bubbles rising up to the surface as guests aboard start to see various undersea life as they head into the surrounding lagoon. As the adventure moves along, the narration from the captain is ongoing, as he takes the sub deeper into the water to navigate through different events that take place along the way. As for the ride's vehicles themselves, they aren't real submarines. They're actually boats outfitted to resemble a submarine, as they do not actually submerge into the water as a sub would. Instead, the illusion is created by having guests of the attraction seated below the waterline, looking out of the portholes, and again with the use of bubbles to create a dive effect. The show building itself is disguised as a cave. A fun fact, the actual show building, with its entrance and exit disguised as a cave, actually sits under a portion of the Autopia tracks as well as the monorail tracks above. On September 8, 1998, the Submarine Voyage had closed, and shortly thereafter, an announcement of a new attraction would be coming. However, the ride remained closed with the lagoon still filled with water, and in 2005 it would eventually be drained to make way for a new attraction, Finding Nemo Submarine Voyage, which debuted on June 11, 2007. The attraction was now based on the Disney Pixar film entitled Finding Nemo, which came out in 2003. A fun fact, the original 8 submarines from 1959 that were used in the original attraction, Submarine Voyage, were repurposed and used on the Nemo attraction. They were inspected and got a new fresh paint job along with other modern upgrades so the attraction could run more efficiently. Prior to the Submarine Voyage attraction, in 1955, Disney had an attraction called the Tomorrowland boats that resided in the same area that the future Submarine Voyage would eventually be built. These boats could be taken out into the small man-made lagoon with some small island-like areas in the middle. The boats would from time to time have mechanical issues, so just shortly after it opened, about a month later, it was closed for some upgrades which included redesigned boats and a new name. It would now be called the Phantom Boats. However, this version only lasted until late 1956 as Walt Disney had a much more immersive idea, and Bob Gurr was once again enlisted to create a new version of the boats so they resembled speedboats. The ride relocated to Fantasyland, more or less on the border of both Tomorrowland and Fantasyland, and was opened in 1957 as the Motorboat Cruise. Unlike its predecessor, the Tomorrowland boats, the Motorboat Cruise was on an underwater track invisible to the riders, in which it gave them the illusion of them steering a real speedboat. The track design initially had a little leeway in it, so when riders of the boats would steer, the boats could, up to a certain point, be steered in that direction until eventually coming in contact with the sides of the underwater track. This kept the boats on a specific, predetermined track, although the track was later redesigned to be much more narrower to address early issues with the attraction. The boat ride went through many canals throughout its adventure, and even made its way under the train tracks for the viewliner of Tomorrow when it was still operating. Once the monorail was constructed during Tomorrowland's expansion in 1959, the boats would now travel under the various support columns of the monorail, and it added to the atmosphere and scenic views guests could take in. There was also various man-made rockwork and mini rapids the boats would travel through to give it even more of an adventure for the riders. As Mickey's Toontown was set to open in 1993, the Motorboat Cruise had seen better days, with a short-lived retheme involving the gummy bears entitled Motorboat Cruise to Gummy Glen. The boats took their last ride on January 11, 1993. The loading dock of the attraction remained, with most of the old waterways eventually filled in with landscaping many years later. The attraction's boat track was also removed. This area was eventually renamed Fantasia Gardens. The loading dock would now serve as a dining area or just a place to relax. Now, we'll take a look at some more of Disneyland's iconic attractions that we didn't mention earlier. However, in no particular order, these rides were added to Disneyland over the years, and some continue to enchant, thrill, and mystify park guests of all ages to this very day, as of this writing. We'll start off with the PeopleMover, located in Tomorrowland. Although this iconic ride feels like it could have been at the park from opening day, seeing how well it's integrated into Tomorrowland, that's not the case. The ride had its debut opening on July 2, 1967, 12 years after Disneyland opened its gates. Goodyear sponsored the attraction in its early years, right up till 1981, and the PeopleMover logo even shared a similar typeface to Goodyear's logo. Some fun facts. The name PeopleMover was actually the working title to this ride while it was being designed, and the name eventually stayed. It was also referred to as the Wedway PeopleMover, as the ride was designed by Wed Enterprises, which today is known as Walt Disney Imagineering. The PeopleMover was a concept Walt Disney and his design team had as a public transit system for the future. It was also imagined to be one of the transportation systems used in something Walt was looking forward to building, Epcot City. Walt had designed an attraction for the 1964-65 New York World's Fair entitled the Ford Magic Skyway. In similar fashion to the PeopleMover, the Magic Skyway traveled around the park and back to its station, although the Magic Skyway had real-looking cars on a track that guests could ride in. The track used in the Magic Skyway was also similar to the track which would eventually be used on the PeopleMover ride, although it was updated to accommodate the PeopleMover's ride system in its set of train cars. The PeopleMover, when it opened, consisted of several 4-car trains, each colored red, blue, yellow, and green. If the PeopleMover and, well, most of Tomorrowland transported you into a World's Fair type feeling, that was no mistake, as Tomorrowland itself and its attractions were designed in that way. You can say it was a precursor to the Epcot project that Walt was imagining at the time. The attraction's train car system was in constant motion. Guests would board the train cars on a platform that was also moving. However, the motion was slow enough for guests to board safely. The trains were pushed by tires that were integrated into the track. Each car was equipped with speakers that played narration to what the guests on the ride were seeing or about to see as the ride moved along. What made this ride unique was the various buildings and areas it traversed in and over. Disney, over the years, had several ride vehicles that would travel through buildings and give the guests riding a unique perspective to what they were seeing. The PeopleMover over in Tomorrowland was designed to loop around the park and did not serve as transportation, rather just a scenic adventure through part of the Disney park. As stated earlier, the PeopleMover was somewhat of a prototype which Walt would eventually want the system put in use for public transportation at some point in the future. With this innovative attraction and the countless park guests that adored this ride, it didn't seem like the attraction would close. However, it did on August 21st, 1995. In 1998, a short-lived, reimagined ride replaced the PeopleMover. It was called the Rocket Rods. The Rocket Rods used the same track as the PeopleMover, although had to be retrofitted to accommodate the new ride vehicles the Rocket Rods utilized. The Rocket Rods were confirmed closed on April 27th, 2001, although it had originally closed to park guests on September 25, 2000 for maintenance, never to reopen again. As of this writing, the PeopleMover ride tracks and its layout are still in Tomorrowland. Although the attraction is closed, it's still maintained by Disney. Another attraction iconic to Disney was the Carousel of Progress. It opened in Disneyland on July 2, 1967. The attraction actually got its start off Disney property at the 1964-65 New York World's Fair. General Electric had a pavilion at the fair, and they needed a feature attraction. They enlisted Mr. Walt Disney to design one. Walt had an idea to showcase electrical progress and utilize new technology to do so. He reached back into some earlier concepts he originally had, and he, with his design team, started the task of designing and building audio animatronics. Walt himself was no stranger to the world of animatronics, as he had many of them designed back in Disneyland. Bob Gurr and his team of Imagineers came up with an idea for a carousel-type theater. With this idea, a moving theater in the round could be implemented around a stationary set of stages. This allowed for guests to sit within the theater as they circled around the show stage. Walt commissioned the Sherman Brothers to write a thematic song for the fair's attraction. The Sherman Brothers themselves were Walt's go-tos, as they produced music for several of Walt's attractions.
Dick and Bob Sherman of the Walt Disney Studio. The Sherman Brothers have written many of the wonderful songs for motion pictures and television shows, and I think this song, written especially for you, captures the spirit of the General Electric Pavilion at the New York World's Fair.
The show opened in General Electric's pavilion. It was called Progressland and featured the progress of electricity and its technology. Once the New York's World Fair wrapped up, the attraction was then repurposed and made its way over to Disneyland and opened there on July 2, 1967 as the Carousel of Progress.
Welcome to the General Electric Carousel of Progress.
As the building itself could not be transported from the New York's World Fair over to Disneyland, an identical structure was built at Disneyland to house all of the original animatronics and sets that were used in the World's Fair version. Only small changes were made. However, what Disneyland Park guests would experience was pretty much the same attraction that the New York World's Fair guests had experienced. General Electric would also be the sponsor of the Carousel of Progress at Disneyland. The Carousel of Progress allowed park guests to experience technology and innovation throughout several past and more present decades. When the show concluded, guests would be transported via moving walkways to the second level of the attraction's show building for a brief look and presentation of Walt Disney's model he had for Progress City. This model was based on Walt's idea for the future Epcot project. The Carousel of Progress at Disneyland closed on September 9, 1973, and was packed up and transported to Walt's new park, Walt Disney World, where it would continue to have GE as a sponsor for several years. As for the Progress City model located on the second floor of the attraction, it too would be disassembled and later assembled at Walt Disney World. As for Disneyland, the Carousel's unique show building was reimagined into a new show entitled America Sings. America Sings paid tribute to America's bicentennial and American music. It closed in 1988. Disney's Innovations attraction occupied the building from its opening in 1998 till its closing in 2015. On November 15, 2015, the building would reopen as Tomorrowland Expo Center and hosted the Star Wars exhibit, Star Wars Launch Bay. There can never be too many iconic Disney attractions, and the next one on the list is no different. It's Disneyland's Haunted Mansion. On August 9, 1969, the Haunted Mansion opened in New Orleans Square. The idea for the Haunted Mansion came to Walt before Disneyland was built. Back in 1951, as mentioned earlier, Walt's idea for a theme park type setting across from his studios in Burbank led him to come up with several attractions. One of them was a haunted manor. He and one of his first Imagineers went to work on the design. This early idea was then transferred over to Disneyland and was set to be built in an area called New Orleans Square that sat right between Frontierland and Adventureland. Walt and his team of Imagineers came up with the various scenes in the attraction, and in 1961, the Haunted Mansion was announced that it would open in 1963. Construction of the attraction began in 1962, and its exterior facade was completed in 1963. Walt had a preview of what was to come within the Haunted Mansion on a televised program entitled Walt Disney's Wonderful World of Color in 1965. It was billed as Disney's 10th Centennial, as he called it, celebrating Disneyland's 10-year anniversary. With all of this, the Haunted Mansion would not open till 1969, in large part because of Walt being involved in the New York's World Fair at the time. Another contributing factor was Walt's passing in 1966 and a redesign prior to its 1969 opening. The attraction is a dark ride. Guests enter the now classic stretching room while the ghost host narrates. The Haunted Mansion would come to have many iconic scenes that one would imagine when thinking of this attraction. The Haunted Mansion, along with several other Disneyland attractions, have been duplicated in many of Disney's other parks throughout the years. Another attraction within New Orleans Square opened on March 18, 1967. Its name, Pirates of the Caribbean. This would be one of Walt's last rides that he had overseen prior to his passing. The attraction's storyline is of pirates' voyages and adventures throughout the 17th and 18th centuries. Originally designed to be a walkthrough attraction, Walt saw the success of the implementation of boats in his attraction, It's a Small World, at the 1964-65 New York World's Fair. With that, Disney chose to implement a boat system for his pirate attraction. This attraction was also featured in Walt Disney's Wonderful World of Color, where he gives viewers a very detailed walkthrough of a mock-up miniature model of the attraction.
In here, we have a special attraction. We call it the Blue Bayou Lagoon. And people are going to get on a boat here and ride through the lagoon. And then as they get around here, we're going to take them down a waterfall.
As guests board their boat, they are taken onto the bayou and travel along the waters through many now classic scenes. As with all Disney attractions, Pirates of the Caribbean is an amazingly detailed ride with detailed audio animatronics along the way. And another feature of the attraction is the Blue Bayou restaurant. guests could dine alongside the bayou that is part of the Pirates of the Caribbean ride for an incredible, unique dining experience. The attraction was duplicated in many of Disney's other parks throughout the years and remains one of Disney's very popular attractions.
We're working on a full-scale pirate, Julie, and I'd like you to have a look at him here.
This little miniature here is taken first from a sketch. We make these sketches to figure out the types and the characters, and then Blaine takes them and puts them in dimension. As you get down here and look through that little ring, you get the view that the audience gets.
One of Disney's most famous, iconic attractions that really says you have arrived at a Disney park opened at Disneyland on May 28, 1966. This attraction was It's a Small World. Another very popular attraction that is so beloved by park guests, like many other attractions that opened several years after Disneyland's debut, It's a Small World feels like it's been with the park since opening day in 1955. It's hard to imagine a time prior to 1966 that this attraction never existed. It's just quintessential Disney. However, even though it had not existed in Disneyland prior to 1966, the ride did have life somewhere else. And if you guessed the 1964 New York World's Fair, you would be correct. Like several other Disney mainstay attractions, It's a Small World got its start at the 1964 New York World's Fair, and with its wide popularity, it was relocated at Disneyland after the World's Fair had come to an end in 1965. It's a Small World sold 10 million tickets to World's Fair guests in the time it was open. As mentioned earlier, the design of the World's Fair version of It's a Small World influenced Walt to redesign the Pirates of the Caribbean attraction to utilize a boat ride system as well. Mary Blair, who is one of Walt's art directors on several Disney animated films, was front and center in creating the look and design of the attraction. She's also featured on Walt's Tencennial program explaining a bit of her process in designing It's a Small World.
This is our Imagineering department. It is here where we dream up all the future things for Disneyland. It is also here that we dreamed up the things for the World's Fair. And some of those things are coming back to Disneyland. And especially one that I'm in love with is the story of the children of the world. We call it It's a Small World. So over here, we're designing the facade for that thing when it does come back to Disneyland. I want you to meet Mary Blair. When the thing is really built at Disneyland, those towers will be 60, 70 feet high. Well, from that, we get an idea of the kind of lighting we want at night, because this is one of the few that we've ever designed to really give a real treatment at night. Now we're going into the night lighting effects, and a lot of that will be translucent with light coming through and lights moving all across it. It'll be beautiful, like a piece of jewelry, we hope.
Arrow Development was instrumental in the boat design and system. Disney and Arrow had a close working relationship, and Arrow worked closely on various Disney attractions, including the boats on Pirates of the Caribbean as well. Walt looked no further than his very talented songwriting team, the Sherman Brothers. When Walt approached them to write a song for the attraction, he wanted a song that could be universally interpreted, and the Sherman Brothers came up with the song It's a Small World After All. After some tweaking of the song, Walt was very impressed with what they had written, and that led him to name the attraction after the song title, It's a Small World. This was an exciting time for Walt. His dream of Disneyland had come to fruition in 1955, and now 9 to 10 years later, he found himself involved with the 1964 New York World's Fair, as well as celebrating Disneyland's 10-year anniversary in 1965. Added to all of this, his TV program highlighted all the magical things yet to come, both at the World's Fair and at his Disney park. Heading back into Tomorrowland, another of Walt's space-age attractions was ready for its debut. That attraction, Space Mountain, opening on May 27, 1977. Walt had an idea for a space-age roller coaster after he saw the success of the Matterhorn bobsleds. Many factors, including limited space and the passing of Walt in 1966, put the project on hold, and the focus then was on building Walt Disney World in Florida. With that, when Space Mountain in Disneyland did finally open in 1977, it was modeled after the same attraction that opened at Walt Disney World's Magic Kingdom in Florida on January 15, 1975. Space Mountain proved popular in Florida, and it was then that Disney decided to duplicate it at Disneyland in Anaheim. Arrow Development, who helped with the design of the Matterhorn, was also enlisted to do the same for Space Mountain. Tubular steel tracks, similar in design to the Matterhorn bobsleds tracks, are used within Space Mountain. The layout at Disneyland is a bit different than the attraction at the Magic Kingdom in Florida. For one, Disneyland's size and diameter are a bit smaller than its Florida counterpart. The attraction's outer facade is quite similar at both parks. This would be Disneyland's second roller coaster at the park, and sponsors and renovations would be implemented over the years. As we touched upon some of Disneyland's original opening day attractions, we also took a glimpse of some more of Disneyland's iconic attractions that opened many years to many decades after the park's opening day back on July 17, 1955. There are also many attractions we may have not covered. As older attractions and entertainment have gone, new ones have replaced them, and in some areas, new lands over the years have come into existence. Some notable and quite popular new lands included Mickey's Toontown. On June 22, 1986, Big Thunder Ranch opened at Disneyland. It was located in Frontierland and consisted of a petting zoo, a walk-through log cabin, as well as a dining area. The area closed on January 11, 2016, to make way for a new and much anticipated land, Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. Galaxy's Edge opened at Disneyland on May 31, 2019. The land is set within the village of Black Spire Outpost on the planet Batuu. Galaxy's Edge took quite a bit of land, not just limited to the area of Big Thunder Ranch, but also previous backstage areas were repurposed for the use of Galaxy's Edge. As we look back and conclude our historic adventure at Disneyland, we can see that Walt had a great vision for the future and also took great interest in the past and present. His ideas and visions will always be a part of Disneyland, and guests can see all of that to this very day when they visit. In fact, once Disneyland was up and running, it wouldn't be long before Walt and his team looked towards the future with plans to build another Disney park. In the mid-1960s, a new Disney project was announced to the public. This time around, it would be in Florida, and its working title would be The Florida Project, which later became home to Walt Disney World. Here, Walt could build upon his success of Disneyland and build it bigger, with room for expansions, and all of this would play out in specials made for TV with Walt at the helm, describing the new park and all of what was yet to come, including an experimental city he entitled Epcot. Shortly after, on December 15, 1966, Walter Elias Disney passed away. Many of his future visions were placed on hold, both at the Disneyland Park and on the up-and-coming Walt Disney World project in Florida. Walt's team of Imagineers, along with his brother Roy Disney, helped bring Walt's vision of Disney World to fruition. And on October 1, 1971, Walt Disney World had its opening day celebration. Shortly thereafter, Roy dedicated the park to his brother, and the name of the park would be Walt Disney World to forever honor his brother and carry on his legacy. As the years move on, Disney parks continue to move forward as well, advancing in new technologies to help tell the stories both new and old. This was also Mr. Walt Disney's philosophy. Always one for utilizing advanced technologies with his team of Imagineers at his side, creating everything from their own ride systems and vehicles to full-featured attractions with advanced animatronics to complement them. One of the most magical places on Earth started with a magical vision and one man's dream. That dream came to fruition when Walter Elias Disney envisioned a theme park, built it, and opened it to the public on July 17, 1955. So the next time you get a chance to experience the grandeur of Disneyland, don't forget to allow yourself to also bask in the history of Disneyland.